Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. This is a podcast about our relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstensen, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome back to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. And today I am here with my friend Mirin Mooney, who is a mental health coach and mentor. And having struggled with her mental health in the form of depression, self-harm, and bulimia, and finding that traditional treatments were ineffective, she has dedicated the past decade to traveling the world and learning from different cultures and their approaches to healing and mental health. So Mirin combines the ancient practices of Ayurveda, Shamanism, and energy healing with her education in modern psychotherapy, mindfulness, coaching, and creative therapists to help her deliver workshops, programs, and one-to-one services on topics such as mindfulness, past trauma, emotional intelligence, self-love, and the use of art and body in healing. And I know that she's also an artist because I have seen her work. And she specializes in empowering young women to overcome their insecurities and unresolved issues from the past so that they can love themselves unconditionally, express themselves fearlessly, and create a deeply fulfilling life their soul craves. Thank you, Mirin, for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Hi, thank you, Lynn. I'm excited to be here. We always seem to have very good conversations. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And so, Mirin, from reading your bio, I know, and from, of course, knowing you a bit personally as well, I know that you have a lot of lived experience and experienced a lot of different things about in form of mental health challenges and then looking at alternative ways of healing. So I suppose would you be open to talk a little bit about what your journey has been like and looked like so far?
That's a long journey we're going to be talking about.
We got time.
Well, okay, so let's go all the way back. So yeah, like you said, I struggled a lot with my mental health. I've kind of been reframing my experience a little bit recently, as I've been discovering about neurodivergence and thinking, maybe I'm possibly autistic or there's something going on there. And that actually gives me a lot of context for why I struggled with my mental health when I was younger, I had big feelings and I didn't know what to do with them, what they meant, what they were saying. And I felt that everyone else coped so much better with life than me. And I had this big internal emotional landscape that I didn't know how to cope with. And so I turned against myself, and that's where the self-harm came in. And that was a self-perpetuating cycle. And then food became a way. In part, it became a way, I didn't know it at the time, but it was a way of bringing some sense of control in my life where, I had these big emotions. I had no control over life. We don't have any control over. So in one part, the eating disorder gave me a way to have some control. It was a way of punishing myself. And with those things, it's so, it can be very hard to get out, I don't know if it's almost an addiction or what it is, but there is, because with, I guess, bulimia and making yourself sick, then there's the binge that comes with it. And because you're been throwing up and getting rid of all the nutrients, the body becomes like this crazy animal oh, you need to feed me. And at that point, the mind, you have no control over yourself, and then you binge and you binge and you binge, and then you feel guilty, and then you're, throwing up, and it just happens over and over again. And it is exhausting, even just thinking about it and talking about it now. I'm just like, oh my God, that was, and then that fed into the self-hatred. So it's doing these things with the self-harm and the bulimia to help avoid my emotions or as ways of coping. But the reality is they made things worse. And it's just very difficult to be able to break free with them. And even, so as the years went by, I was gradually finding ways to kind of distance myself from them, but they never. It took a long time. I'd have a break from self-harming or from being throwing up, and then you'd slip back into it for a few months and out, and it wasn't like suddenly stop and it's all over. It took what was a slippery road.
Yeah. I think that's pretty normal. And I think that's part of a healing journey, right? It's not linear, but it feels like somehow, somewhere, we pick up the idea that if you're kind of doing the work and you stop doing the behaviors for a period of time and then you revert back to it, it's like, okay, well, obviously there's something wrong with me and I'm never going to get better. And it's just not possible for me. Whereas it's not like that each time. I feel like we come back, the work before is not lost. It's just gradually building on top of each other.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It is that's exactly it. It becomes a little bit stronger. Um, yeah, well, it's there, as opposed if you'd never done that healing work before, kind of you would be starting from zero all over again. So yeah, it did get easier, each time. But there was also that fear of like, oh my God, I've slipped up. What if I never get better? You know?
Yeah.
Um,
And was there something like, do you think it was like was it a gradual process to move out of the bulimia and the self-harm, or was there any point on that journey where there was like kind of like a big light bulb moment or something that helped to sort of make a bigger shift?
I don't know if there's a specific light bulb moment. I think it was a compounding of everything. I feel like maybe even to you in another talk I've talked about, that I have this memory of, there was one day where I was just literally going backwards and forwards between the kitchen and the bathroom. And, in my memory, I remember like, oh my God, this is exhausting. I can't keep doing this. And that's like a key moment that I remember. But it was a gradual buildup, I think as well. Of just kind of getting, because like I said, it's really tiring.
Yeah, it is exhausting. And I think sometimes the getting to that point where it's like I just can't do it anymore can also be the like sometimes it feels like we have to get to some sort of bottom point where it's like the only way up is the only way out of it is up and out of it because it's like I just can't do it, whether that is like binging and purging or restricting and binging. And it's like it's just so exhausting. And I think for people who've never experienced it, it's very difficult to imagine how incredibly all-consuming it is when your relationship with food is not
Yeah,
in a good place.
yeah, definitely. And because it'd be great if you could just stop, but although you're the one taking these actions, you don't really have control over it, which is ironic. It's like if you could just stop, you would just stop, but it's a complex thing, because like in my experience, that there's all that emotional stuff going on to it and it's manifesting as this physical, these actions, this binging and this purging. But it's hard to it's hard to explain, I imagine people with addiction might be able to relate a little bit in some ways because it is there. I think there's a little bit of an overlap there. Not that they're necessarily the same, but for someone who hasn't experienced these, I don't know. I don't know how what they must think or if they can understand. Um,
Yeah. And what were the things then that you found, like, what are the things that's been helpful to get you to where you are now?
yeah, and it's funny because like it just seems like it's such a distant memory and it's a totally different me back then, but at the same time, she is me and I am her. Um, so yeah, at the time, like I said, I was so disconnected from my emotions. I didn't know what they were. So kind of talking about it wasn't working. Having said that, maybe I just hadn't found the right therapist, or who knows. But so I kind of mindfulness was one of the first big things that kind of started shifting for me. I did the MBSR course, the mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And at the time, I didn't realize it was impacting me this much. But when I look back now, I'm like, okay, that's actually when things finally started moving. So that was one big thing. Traveling was a big thing for me, kind of getting into a new space kind of allowed me to reinvent myself, rediscover myself. Kind of, I think with these things, like any, when you're in that, it's harder to change when you're in the same environment where the problem developed, and kind of being in a totally different environment gave me that opportunity to restart. I know that's not possible for everyone, but that definitely helped me as well. And then kind of that's when I came to yoga and kind of discovered my artistic self as well, like learning to be creative. That was very healing for me, and learning to express myself. Because part of my mental health problems was that a lack of confidence, a lack of trust in myself, and totally like unable to express myself, and just kind of super people pleasing and wanting to fit in and wanting people to like me. So art, painting specifically, was the first thing that was an avenue that allowed me to explore expressing myself. And I think with time that then kind of translated in me being able to express myself verbally. It's funny to think about it now because I'm very able to express myself verbally. But honestly, back then it's like words would just like get stuck in my throat. Like I was like, oh, it doesn't matter. People don't need to hear my opinion. Somebody else will say it,
Yeah, it's so interesting to how, I mean, we are the person that we are, I think, but also how layers of us come to the forefront or change or evolve over time as our lives. But I think like who we are is probably who we always were, only different experiences and time and healing work and exploration can bring out maybe the sides that needed more support, like in terms of being able to express yourself in different ways when other ways weren't available at the time. I'm guessing even to your healing work, it hasn't made you less emotional, like
No.
and less of a feeling being.
No.
But
That
it
doesn't
sounds
go away. It turns out that stays.
yeah, but it sounds like you have a different way of relating to that now,
Yeah,
and a different way of appreciating it, maybe like those
yeah,
super gifts that you have.
definitely. And it sounds like such a simple thing, giving yourself permission to feel, to have your feelings, to be who you are, and to express them. But it's such a big shift for me, and I know it's such a big shift for for people who have that similar experience of having really strong emotional landscapes. But yeah, so kind of it's been about, I cry all the time, but it's been about being okay. That's okay. I'm allowed to cry, and maybe I'm crying in a situation that other people don't cry in. But I don't need that. Doesn't even I don't even think about that anymore. It's like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. This is how I express myself. It's okay. But I think there was an element of learning to feel safe in that as well, and especially kind of in this world we live in, kind of there's often that sense of don't be vulnerable, or it's not safe to be vulnerable. It's, we have to be strong. There's all these shoulds, but we're all different, and some of us are very emotional, and that's wonderful, and there's like you said, there's the beauty in that, while I feel like sadness really deeply, I also feel joy in such a wonderful thing. And that's also the thing, sorry. But the more we open ourselves up to feeling sadness and those difficult, uncomfortable emotions, we also open ourselves up more to feeling more joy and more happiness. It opens up in all directions. It's not just that we're going to only feel sadness now.
Yeah, and I mean that's what's said as well. It's like that we can't selectively numb emotions either. So if we are feeling more sadness, we can't just knock that out because it takes everything else with it. So I think what you're saying is like working towards a place where we have more capacity to feel all the emotions that we have as human, And ideally, of course, feeling safe in that the environment is safe to do so, but that it doesn't spill in, like, it doesn't spill over. I suppose we when you have big emotions, it can feel like, oh my God, if I allow this, I'm never going to come out of it. Or, particularly when it's bigger ones like sadness or grief, or
Mm,
anger, that it's just like I'm just going to get lost inside of that. But
mm,
they do kind of change as well. And if we're trying to not give space for those, the joy and the happiness and the contentment and those feelings tends to not really be there then either.
yeah, exactly. Um, there's something you said there that really stood out to me, and it's gone. It's gone. Maybe it'll come back. Um,
Fine. Um, so I know in your work you talk a lot about boundaries. Boundaries is
mm,
of, at least from the content you create, those seems to be really big topics. And I feel like they're connected. And I would
yeah.
love for us to talk, I suppose I would love for us to talk a little bit about when you talk about boundaries, like what do you mean? Like how do you explain like boundaries? Because it's a quite big concept, I feel.
It's a big concept, and there are actually just many, many types of boundaries. I really see boundaries as a way of taking care of ourselves, and like you said, a way of being loving towards ourselves. Boundaries, I guess, are kind of what we deem. It's so hard actually to summarize in a short sentence. Um, I think I'll give. Will I give some examples? Will I explain it?
Yeah, give
Um,
us
uh,
examples. I think that might be helpful to
yeah.
explain it.
Okay, so examples might be, especially like for people pleasers, and we always have this habit of giving, 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 and taking care of other people. And if we're not receiving that back, obviously that's super depleting. So a boundary might be learning to say no sometimes to other people, be like, actually, I don't have the capacity for this. I still love you, I still care for you, but I just need to take care of myself first. So that's an example of a boundary. Um, and if you then kind of some people say that just that is a request and it's not technically a boundary. I personally feel that you don't necessarily to take that a step further, what sometimes if you find people are constantly disrespecting your boundaries, then you're like, okay, let's put a consequence. If you keep taking from me, then I'm going to remove myself from your life. So I think technically that's what a boundary is. It's saying, setting a limit, and then there's a consequence if that limit isn't respected. That's an example. I mean, then there's kind of emotional boundaries, and especially, for me, I'm an empath, and as many other people are, it's not taking on other people's emotions as your own, and not taking on other people's thoughts and beliefs as your own. Boundaries might also come to physical contact. If you don't want to be touched, some people aren't comfortable with physical contact. It's saying no, I don't want you to touch me. Or it might be about sharing things and not just giving, be like, I don't want to share my things with you. And I know it sounds like a lot of no's and putting up walls, and that's the thing. Boundaries can go kind of in either direction. They can be too loose, or they can be too rigid. And when they're too rigid, you end up pushing everybody away. And then if they're too loose, you end up either consciously or unconsciously resenting everyone, right? So it's kind of, without healthy levels of boundaries, we can't actually relate deeply with people, for us to like setting about, if you struggle with having boundaries that are too loose and you learn to set boundaries, there might be some, you might need to navigate some discomfort, some conflict. But I find that actually just brings more depth to your relationship, because you're navigating these uncomfortable things together, and you're like, but you're choosing to stay together. Because if you didn't want to be with, or spend time with that person, then you wouldn't even bother setting the boundary. You just set away. And so I always think it's important to remember that on the people who are on the receiving end of boundaries. So that person setting a boundary because they want to maintain a relationship with me. It's not because they're trying to push me away. They want to keep me in their life. And so, And if that person cares about the other person, then of course they're going to want to hear and listen and try to respect those boundaries.
So
That
what
makes
you're
sense.
saying really is like actually with boundaries, in order for them to be healthy, there is a bit of yield and having a dialogue with ideally with the person that you're kind of saying no to, or creating a different, like, I don't know, I was going to use the word divide, but that doesn't feel right. But the kind of a different structure to within the relationship to what you might have had previous is like it's the negotiation ideally or the dialogue around that that can create a healthier and more meaningful relationship. Whereas I suppose if I said to a friend of mine, it's like, I don't know, I don't like that, you ring me every other every other day, for example. I don't have a friend like that, but say they were just constantly ringing me with all their problems
Yeah.
and constantly, and I might have been fine at the beginning, and it's like, yeah, and your own people pleasing tendency would be like, oh yeah, I want to be there for them, and then you start feeling overwhelmed or tired, or other things happen in your life, and you just can't keep it up, and then you say, look, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. And ideally, I suppose in that scenario, the other person you would be able to have a conversation around that you care about them, but here's what I'm able for, and that they can hear that in the sense of, okay, because you do, I mean, I know when somebody sets a boundary with me, sometimes I can feel the sort of sting of it,
Oh
but
yeah,
also
100%.
realizing, okay, but this is what this person wants. This is what they're looking for. And yes, it might sting, but also if I still care about them, then I want to respect that, because that is going to be better for a relationship long term. Whereas I think when you have somebody who can't hear, when you're saying, I don't, when you do that, it's painful, or I don't appreciate it, or it's not helpful, and the other person just goes, well, it's my way or the highway kind of thing. Well, then you could decide if you're ready for the highway, because you might go, okay, well, that's their standpoint. So maybe this isn't a healthy relationship to be in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a hard decision to make. Um, and it's up to each individual and each relation to decide, how important is it to have that person in your life. Um, but it's about needs as well, kind of is what came to me as we were saying that it's about taking care of our needs, and that's why it's about self-love and self-care as well. We set boundaries so that we can take care of our needs. Often it is those emotional and or energetic um needs. And I think kind of that scenario you described it, it's very common of that we have people for people who are very kind of empathic. They can sometimes just attract people who like to dump all their problems on them, and it's exhausting. I have experience with that, and it's really, really tiring. And so it's, the first part is even just validating yourself. It's okay, I'm tired. I'm allowed to be tired, and this is where that tiredness comes from. And if I need going to take care of myself, I need to do something else. I need to do something about that. Nobody else can do that, but it's really scary, if you're not used to expressing yourself, if you're not used to setting those boundaries, and if you are a people pleaser, or and we all want to be loved. That's the thing. We all want to be loved. We don't want to hurt other people, and there's that fear that if I go and set this boundary, I'm going to hurt that person. They're not going to like me. There's that fear that you're going to lose them. But kind of the bottom line that I always say is, if people care about you and love you, they want to hear your boundaries. They want to be able to respect your boundaries. And it might be, it's like you said, it's challenging to hear boundaries sometimes, but they will get over it if they care about you. And then if they don't care about you, is that somebody you want in your life? You
Yeah.
know?
Creates well, it sets a tone, or I suppose it reveals something if we say no. And I think in my experience, particularly when it came like to work, like when I was been working for other people and employment and stuff, and when I was younger, just like desperate people pleaser, and I suppose very bit of a workaholic, very proud of my work ethics, even though they made me work myself into the ground. And then
Mm.
you kind of, and I'm curious if you've had this experience, like, so you say yes, 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 oh yeah, that's not a bother, like I can do that, yeah, no problem. And then you do it, and then you're running yourself into the ground, and now you can't do it because you're actually exhausted and you're about to be burnt out. So you kind of have to say, sorry, I can't do that. But now you've created this dynamic in the relationship where they have an expectation. Oh, this person always says yes when I ask them. So if I'm asking them for something, I can kind of rely on them, even though sometimes maybe the request was a bit too
Mm.
much. And they were just like, yeah, yeah, I'll just pass it on to Lynn, or I'll pass it on to Miriam, because she's going to say yes no matter what. So that's fine. I don't have to think about it. And now you just say, sorry, I'm not available, or I can't do that.
Mm.
And and in my experience, and I've had this happen in my life a few times, then it just blows up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you kind of go, right. And it wasn't until I was doing a course a few years ago with a woman who was a mediator, and she explained that sort of drama triangle. But she also kind of said that if this is the trajectory goes like that, if you don't set your boundaries earlier on, because people then develop an expectation or a kind of a view of where you're at. So if you say kind of no earlier, or sort of say, um, can I get back to you on that? I just need a little bit of time to think about it. Then they know that that's how you operate. But if you've been saying yes, 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 yes for weeks and months and even years, and then all of a sudden you say no, it's such a shock to the other person's system that they don't expect it, and it's highly likely that it blows up, because now you create a conflict rather than, a little boundary that was a nice boundary that should have been put in there way earlier. And yeah, so
Yeah. I don't have experience of that myself. I think, yeah, part of it is people have the expectations, right? And then you're defying those expectations. But I think that's also why people are afraid. Again, that's why we're afraid to set boundaries, because we're afraid of what you described, exactly what you described as happening. Um, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's like we're responsible for ourselves. And
yeah,
we're not always, and obviously we do care about other people and we don't want to disappoint people. Um, but we have to take care of ourselves first and foremost. And then, that's why sometimes having support in that process, kind of to reassure you, you're doing the right thing, can be really beneficial, because otherwise it's, it's scary.
yeah. So working with somebody alongside you as you start to set a bit more boundaries in your life in
Yeah.
order to be more self-protected, and creating more space for self-care. Like, even if we're only talking about self-care in the basic sense of, this is my time, this is my body, this is, my needs. So yeah, I had that blowing up situation several times in my life, at least
Mm.
four, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping now that I've got to a place where I've sort of learned it. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to say, maybe, can I get back to you on that, or think about what I say yes to a bit more, because knowing that it also costs energy, even if it's stuff that I want to do. Um, yeah, because they were hard learned lessons, but looking at them, and it wasn't until this lady pointed out this pattern that I could see, oh my God, I was just basically letting people walk in all over me because I just wanted to be liked for
Mm.
until it just physically wasn't possible, or until it crossed some line on my internal values where I was like, wait a second, that I'm not
Mm.
happy with. And then it was like, and then the line was hard, and there was no
Mm.
going back, and it was like complete fracture of the relationship then.
Yeah.
Not an
Yeah.
experience I totally recommend to people,
Yeah,
but
yeah. It doesn't sound very pleasant. I guess I also wonder if it is also like that buildup of maybe resentment from being walked all over in the first place, that kind of comes up at that point
yeah,
as
yeah, that's big too. I think the resentment, and you spoke about that before, like if we keep giving and giving and we're not getting it back, that can create that resentment. So do you want to speak a little bit more into that?
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit of resentment. Kind of, we might be aware of it, but sometimes it's unconscious. And whether it's conscious or unconscious, we are energetic beings and we're emitting that. And whether either on a conscious or unconscious level, the other person is perceiving that as well. So that you know, that again, that creates distance and may cause like all these other, you know, disagreements or lashing outs that we're not even aware where they originally come from. So yeah, that's my little bit on resentment.
I think sometimes people are resentful because when they become passive aggressive, they're
Yeah. Oh
actually
yeah,
quite
yeah, exactly.
resentful. It's like, and then just little snide remarks and stuff, and you're like, why? And it's hard then if the other person is feeling like they're always giving and you're not giving back in the way they expect, but they don't actually say that.
Mm,
Then it builds up to this resentment, and that comes in this passive aggressiveness, and you're like, if you're on the receiving end of it, you kind of go, I don't understand what's the problem. But if you haven't vocalized, like, because again, obviously the other person hasn't set the boundaries they needed to, and start
yeah.
feeling like you're taking advantage of them or whatever, it's like it would be helpful. Like it's helpful to say, actually, I'm not okay with that, because it does help to,
Yeah.
again, mitigate some things to get to a point where blowing up is like
Yeah, yeah.
it's the last resort.
Totally. Well, and that's bringing the unconscious, you know, by naming it, you're bringing the unconscious into the conscious where you can actually deal with it. Whereas if there's just the passive aggressive and nothing's happening, there's all this stuff happening in the unconscious level. And you can't do anything with that, you know, you can't deal with what you don't know. So kind of naming things can be helpful for that reason. And that's why kind of talking about things as well is very, very helpful too.
Yeah. And then the other topic that you talk about as well, and I'm really curious about that, particularly as it pertains to our relationship with ourselves and with our bodies and with food and eating, is self-love. So how do you, and I know I'm asking a very big question here, how do you see that self-love and our relationship with food and eating and our body kind of connect?
I mean, the self-love is kind of, you know, it's foundational to everything, and it's foundational to that, right? Because for like when we have that negative relationship with our body, we're not loving ourselves, we're hating ourselves. When we have that negative relationship with food, it's maybe we're trying to punish ourselves, maybe, you know, whatever it is. You know, and self-love is also that journey of kind of reconnecting with ourselves, because I think if we're having issues with food, there's a certain level amount of self-disconnect, self-hatred, you know, and yeah, you know, like I'm not okay, I need to punish myself, or I need to change myself to be beautiful, to be loved, or whatever, you know, everyone goes that direction for whatever reasons. And learning to love ourselves is like learning to be okay with who we are, learning that I'm lovable just the way I am. I don't need to force myself to be different in order to be loved. But yeah, I see that reconnecting with your physical body as a big part of that too, because I think we disconnect. I'm speaking from my own experience, I guess. Kind of, I was really disconnected from my body. I could like feeling into my body, and I do mindfulness all the time now. I couldn't, you know, and especially my belly. I hated it, and I couldn't feel my belly. And so part of my healing journey and learning to love myself was learning to feel my belly and like putting my hands on it and saying I love you and like things like that, and learning to show love towards myself. Yeah, I mean, self-love is in some ways it's an abstract concept, but I guess it's, you know, you love, you know, you might love somebody else. It's learning to turn that love in towards yourself, and you do that in the same way you show love to other people, you know, whether it's saying nice things to yourself, doing nice things for yourself. And just like in terms of saying nice things to yourself, you don't need to be immediately, oh my God, I love you, but it's maybe immediately catching the inner critic and even toning it down just a tiny bit, or challenging it just a tiny bit. That's kind of where we start. You know, you don't immediately going from hating yourself to love yourself, because that's not possible, or maybe it is, I don't know, but I haven't come across it being possible. But it's those small adjustments of challenging the inner critic, or just toning it down a tiny bit, or even just becoming aware that it's there, and how it's impacting you,
Hmm.
are all good starting points.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you mentioned, because it feels sometimes when we hear about the concept of self-love, and when you are in a space where it's so far removed that it's like, well, either it's like that's fine for other people, or it's the gap is so big that it feels like, well, it's not possible for me. So like obviously it's something else that, I'm useless at, or that's wrong with me. I can't even do that. But what you're saying is like we really have to do like little tiny bits, and maybe the beginning is really just to notice all the internal criticism that is actually being said, that is just humming away constantly in the background.
Yeah. And how it's impacting you as well, I think, is part of that. It's like, okay, it does not feel nice to be mean to
Yeah.
myself.
And one of the things that I often hear though in people I work with, I don't know if I had this particular belief myself, but that it's like, well, like if I loved myself, then I would just like let myself off the hook, or I'd be just like I wouldn't care, or I'd be just really lazy. Like I wouldn't really like do anything. I need to be on top of myself, like kind of with a bit of self-flagellation in order to do things. And I'm really curious, like to that kind of way of thinking, and if that's where it's starting from, even though you might realize that actually when I am telling myself that I don't like this about myself, when I'm useless and I'm all this, I don't take care of myself very well, because I restrict food more, or I'll binge more, and then I feel even worse, and it cycles around that. But like there's still at the same time this belief that, well, if I am kind to myself, I'm just going to turn into this slob and sloth and just be some sort of, I don't know, nebulous kind of being.
Yeah. I don't know. I just want to know where that thought or where that belief comes from, right? Because that belief did not stem from the person. The person was not born with that belief, right? So like where does that even come from? Is it like blaming everything on capitalism these days? But is it that sense of it? Is it from there? Is it um so yeah, like my immediate reaction is like, where does that come from, basically?
Yeah, so being curious, where did we pick up that belief? And I had this conversation with a client of mine quite recently, and we're talking about self-compassion, and this particular person is very hard on himself, and it's getting slightly better, but like it's an ongoing kind of challenge. And it's something I think that's quite fanning the flame of the eating disorder as well. Though it is getting better, but it's a kind of an underlying thing. And when I said, oh, like, what would you say to a friend, like, if they crashed their car or whatever, and they were quite distressed about it, like, would you say to them, oh, Jesus, like, why did you do that? You're like terrible, like, like, why didn't you like do a better job driving? And you must be completely useless and stuff. And what they said was like, oh no, I wouldn't say that, because they're probably already thinking that themselves. So I would,
Mm,
and then the word they used was like, well, I would just sugarcoating it a bit. Like I would just say, oh, it could have been worse. You could have been hurt, and the car could be fixed. And I was like really curious about the use of sugarcoating, because
mm,
I was like, that, well, then isn't genuine in the
yeah,
sense like it could be worse, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you didn't get injured, and the car can be fixed. And that there was a kind of a disconnect in terms of, or a real challenge to go to this place that you can be really genuinely kind towards yourself, and it's not going to have harmful effects.
yeah, yeah. Um, it's interesting though, because that's always the case. That's something I do a lot as well. It's like, what would you say to a friend going through this? And people are able to identify that for the most part, that they wouldn't be so critical to themselves, but then yeah, turning it back on themselves is a little more challenging.
Yeah. And why do you think that is? Like it makes it harder. Like even when we're making the connection that I wouldn't say those things to somebody else. Also being aware because I say those harsh things to myself. So they're probably thinking the same thing if they're in a situation that is difficult. But like bringing that back to ourselves, it's like what alongside starting small, like what are the
Mm,
things like, or like how do we keep the practice going so that it becomes a little bit easier to love ourselves or to be compassionate towards ourselves and take better care of ourselves?
yeah, I mean, our thoughts are habitual, right? So th those negative self-critical thoughts are there out of habit. So the more we actively rewrite them with gentler ones, with habit, they do become easier. Um, I think kind of talking to other people about what we're thinking can help, whether that's friends, whether that's a therapist, kind of that really helps to give us perspective. And it can help, because a lot of then that can maybe might be tied in with shame. So again, talking about it helps to release that shame a little bit. Um, and then I kind of, you know, maybe there's like we said, going back, exploring where it comes from and unraveling it a little bit and being like, okay, actually these thoughts aren't mine. I picked them up from X, Y, and Z, and kind of tentatively. And it's like we've been saying, it's always that tentative, small little actions and little by little building up. Some people are able to do big actions, big fast, but that usually those people have experience kind of doing this work already.
Yeah, that's my experience too. I think when I work with people, if they've done therapy on other areas of their life before, often when we move into the realm of the relationship with food and body image stuff, it can go quicker or the leaps can be bigger or the conversations go deeper sooner
Yeah,
because there is a different foundations than if this is the first time you speak to anybody about anything in your life. It just happens to be so that it starts with food and eating. Um, and it's fine. Like it'll take whatever time it takes.
yeah,
And no journey is better or worse or than another. It's just different,
yeah.
I think. But it is like, and I can see it even for myself. Like it's easier to talk about things or explore stuff like the longer you've been doing that kind of work. It was not easy. Like when somebody said to me 10 years ago, I was like, where do you feel that? Or does it have a color and a shape? And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, actually. I don't really know like what do you mean, And then, you might do guided visualizations and different things and you become more in tune with your body and you're like, oh yeah, that feels like that, or it feels like an age or whatever. And it's like, but if you'd asked me a decade ago, I'm like, I'll just pretend that I know what they're talking about, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's I mean, and I like that because kind of we change. The more we do this stuff, the more we change, the more able we become. And everyone has that capacity for change because I know, like you're saying, when you're in it, you think it's really personal and it's something wrong with you and you're broken and other people can heal and get better, but you can't because there's something specifically wrong with you that means you can't. But all, whatever unhealthy behavior we're doing, it's learned behavior. So we can unlearn it. There was a time, hopefully, when you weren't doing this when you were born, and
Yeah.
I know it develops for some people really young, but you weren't doing it like at the beginning of your life. You learned it, so you can unlearn it and learn new ways of being and thinking, and it is possible for everyone, and that journey is different for everyone. You I'm sure too, you're working with clients, it's everyone is so different in what they need and how they go about it, but it's possible for everyone.
Yeah, and I think as well, one of the things that I have noticed for myself, it's like, sometimes you need to work on something specific, and the teacher appears and you work with somebody for a while, or a mentor, and then it's almost like you kind of got what you needed from that person, and you move on, and you try different modalities. And I
Yeah.
think that can be helpful. I think the one thing though to watch out for is, because this can be, I think, when people aren't quite ready, like they're in the pre-contemplation phase, they're just dabbling in different things, because that gives a sense of, I'm doing something, but I'm actually not doing the work. I'm just
Yeah.
like skimming the books, or I go to this person over here for a session or two, and then I go to another one, and it just feels like I'm not so sure. But I think if we find ourselves there, basically where we probably are is in that Prochaska di Clemente stages of change in the pre-contemplation. We're just thinking about doing something. And that's
Yeah.
fine. But just to realize that, which is different to when we are, we might have outgrown the modality that we've been working in, or that we've been exploring with somebody, and we just need something different. And I see that. And I think as a practitioner working with people, knowing as well that when you've taken somebody as far as you can take them, and that it's good if they need to go off and try something different, or if it isn't a good fit, what they need is not what I offer, to
Yeah.
find somebody else. It's like, here, actually, this person works in this way, and that might actually be a better fit for where you're right now.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's important.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
it's ethical, basically.
Yeah,
But
and I
also,
think
yeah.
it's a wonderful way to be able to work like that, instead of when people end up in a system and you have to fit a system, or it's not going to be helpful for you if you don't fit the system. It can leave you feeling like, well, obviously there is something wrong with
And there,
me
it
because
just
this didn't work.
it reaffirms that sense that there's something wrong with you. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think anybody listening to feels like that. No, it's like, if you haven't found even the right therapist or the right nutrition professional to work with, you just keep trying, because different people work in different ways, even within the similar modalities. People, because we're all humans and we bring our own experiences and
And
personality,
personality, yeah.
different lenses to look at. And yeah, and when the rapport is good, it's very healing for everybody, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. And yeah, like even just that relationship between practitioner and client, kind of, that is healing in and of itself, because we don't have that sort of relationship with most people, maybe anyone, probably anyone in our lives, because everyone's so involved in our lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's nice to have somebody where you can have the space to maybe talk about things that you don't want to talk about with your friends, or
Mm,
your partner, and also somebody who can have a slightly more objective view, or more so even are used to holding space, so they're not going to jump in with advice when you're
yeah.
not ready for it, or
Yeah.
suggestions, or telling you, have you tried this, and you're like, that's not what I wanted.
Just wanted
I
you to listen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, advice are fine, but only when that's what we want.
Yeah.
It's so annoying when people say, I think you should do this, when really you just want to
I just want to
express
vent.
yourself. Vent,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, a good practice to have for anyone, actually. Sometimes when people are talking about things, okay, do you want a solution or do you just want me to listen? Asking that question is can be helpful.
I think there's a caring question actually to
Mm,
ask as well, to sort of, yeah. And to be clear then, because sometimes we do want somebody's points of view or advice, or I don't
mm,
know, can you tell me, or what do you think? But sometimes we just want somebody to listen, because
mm.
we're speaking out loud, we're working things through ourselves, and
Yeah.
the witnessing in that can be very powerful.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Definitely.
So Mirin, what is joyful nourishment to you? Question I ask everybody.
Oh, my joyful nourishment. I mean, first instinctual answer is kind of, it's about what I do, doing activities I enjoy. And that changes all the time. There have been times when I've enjoyed kind of dancing a lot, other times when it's been painting, other times it's watching, watching something or reading or listening. And I honestly, I'm in a phase of re-exploring that for myself at the moment. Kind of, I've been very wrapped up in work a lot recently, and I'm kind of on that in my personal life. I'm like, okay, what do I enjoy doing? Some of the things are like surfing and hiking are big ones, but I'm looking for kind of smaller, easier things. And actually, no, so what I have been exploring the most is taking small little pauses throughout my day, which is really nice. Just sitting and doing nothing. It might be for a minute, it might be for 5 minutes, but I've kind of got so in the habit of like immediately doing one thing, then the next thing, and then the next thing. And I've started taking just little pauses between doing things, and it's really nice.
Love that. That's such a nice reminder to just, to take a pause, particularly when transitioning from one thing to another, and just to refresh. Because, like you said, like, creating, like painting or hiking or surfing, or like they're all great things, but they're not always, they take up space as well. And like when other pieces of one's life, like work, might need to take up a bit of bigger space, it's good to have something that's really small to if you just rejuvenate yourself throughout the day in micro moments. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So where can people find you if they're curious to work with you or know more about you and the work that you do?
So I hang out a lot on Instagram. I'm wildheart_wellness_. But I think if you looked up my name, Mirin Mooney, I would probably show up too. Otherwise, my website, you can find out more in depth the information of all the services I offer. So I do kind of one-to-one coaching is my big thing at the moment. I'm moving away from everything else. I loved working one-to-one with people. So that's my big focus at the moment. And that is wildheart hyphen, is that what the dash is? Wildheart-wellness.com. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Perfect. And I'll link to that in the show notes. Thanks again, Mirin, for being on the Joyful Nourishment podcast.
Yes, and thank you for having me. It was lovely.
Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.